Dalkaen here, and this is my review of Dust and Elysian Tail for PC. Dust is unique among games I've played recently in that it has no immediate predecessor or point of comparison as far as its development process goes. The game was developed by a lone individual by the name of Dean Dodrell over the course of 4 years, and to my knowledge he hasn't yet tackled another project. Initially, it was released on the Xbox Live Marketplace, but I never got around to playing it during that time. After seeing it pop up on Steam and doing some rudimentary research, I decided to give the PC version a try.
And it was in this, our most desperate hour, that the greatest of Elysian Tales began.
The game could best be described as a 2D side-scrolling action RPG. It features real-time combat, leveling, loot, and equipment, and has a pretty strong focus on narrative. Dust takes place in a pseudo-medieval fantasy world called Falana, inhabited by anthropomorphic animal characters. The protagonist, who shares his name with the game itself, awakes in a meadow oblivious to how he got there. Scarcely before he's had time to collect his thoughts, he's approached by a floating, talking sword by the name of Ara, as well as a flying fox/bat character with an adorably squeaky voice. Neither seem willing to divulge what information they might have on Dust's past, as is tradition for amnesiac heroes. Despite the Disney aesthetic, I found myself becoming quite attached to the game's characters, due in no small part to the generally strong voice acting. Dust himself is perfect as the virtuous but humble hero, and Fidget as the spunky companion.
Is that what you're called? A Nimbat?
Yes, hello. My name's Fidget. Maybe we've met? Can I hold it? I want it. It's trying to grab me with its
The visuals are quite strong in most respects, but the full-body character art visible during dialogue seems pretty hit or miss to me. The art style is fine, but the illustrations themselves don't seem to translate well to being blown up quite to that size. The smaller character models look a lot nicer in comparison and don't have the same issues with inconsistent shading. Incidentally, every character in Dust is some kind of anthropomorphic animal character, but the animals in question can be a little ambiguous, save for the rabbit people at the very beginning of the game. The developer himself cites Super Metroid as an influence on this game, and I can certainly see that since it features gated level progression and a similar style of map progression that requires a reasonable amount of backtracking. I found myself most reminded, however, of Muramasa the Demon Blade, Vanillaware's feudal Japan-themed action RPG for Nintendo Wii. The 2D side-scrolling aspect is the same. Both have beautifully illustrated backdrops, branching pathways, and even color-coded barriers that are unlocked through the course of gameplay. In the case of Dust, there are colored stone monuments that can only be bypassed by possessing a resonance gem of the same color. These gems are generally obtained through events in the plot and serve to unlock previously inaccessible areas. The combat is straightforward but engaging. Dust wields a talking sword by the name of Ara in combat, and is capable of performing 3 or 4 different potent combos. He can combine his swordplay with Dust Storm, a fearsome technique in which Dust whirls his blade wildly in front of him. His companion, the Nimbat Fidget, is capable of firing a few different magical projectiles which Dust can amplify through the use of Dust Storm to generally splashy effect. Dust is also capable of using Dust Storm to glide through the air and skewer foes, which I'll be the first to admit is a lot of fun. I found myself relying less and less on melee attacks as the game progressed, and breezed through most encounters by firing some projectiles and wildly hurling myself into the air. This routine could have easily become tiresome if the game was much longer. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay is quite fun, but I wouldn't have minded a couple more mechanics tossed into the mix. Of course, Dust also learned some techniques that aid him in platforming segments. These abilities are pretty standard for these types of games, but they're learned far enough apart from each other that each new technique added to Dust's arsenal is exciting and adds another layer to the gameplay. In most cases, these abilities allow Dust to reach previously inaccessible areas. You'll encounter vines well before you acquire the ability to climb them, for instance, and this is also true for narrow passageways. Later on, you gain the ability to slide through them. Although these abilities are required to advance through the main plot, they also afford you the opportunity to revisit locations and acquire treasures, which require you to solve a brief QuickTime event to open, incidentally. I'm not sure what purpose this serves, since treasure chests require a key anyway.
Anyway, seems to me the only way you're getting through is by sliding. I'd kick you through myself, but you know, I got these fat little legs, and they hardly keep me vertical.
Treasure chests are pretty important because they generally contain blueprints for crafting new equipment. Once you come across Haley the blacksmith, you'll acquire the ability to exchange these blueprints for new gear, provided you have the resources and gold at your disposal. Equipment is not only essential for bolstering your defense, but for increasing your attack power as well. For whatever reason, bonuses to attack seem to be additive, as in plus 100 or whatever to attack, whereas bonuses that affect Fidget are multiplicative. At the end of the game, I had a bonus on my armor that doubled Fidget's magical power, which suited me just fine since I tended to rely on magic more than anything else. Although you'll generally spend long stretches of time exploring new areas and vanquishing hordes of foes, there is a surprising amount of dialogue in Dust. Fortunately, most of it is pretty fun to listen to and occasionally quite hilarious. Fidget in particular has a lot of great lines. What I found most surprising is how invested I became in the game's main plot, particularly by the time I reached the game's final areas. Although the amnesiac hero is a tired and hokey plot convention, especially in video games, I feel it was resolved reasonably well just prior to the game's conclusion. The animated scenes somewhat detract from my immersion due to their amateurish quality, but I could forgive them considering the principal development team consisted of just one person.
She couldn't know what I was about.
Dean Dojel has expressed interest in setting another title in the universe of Falana, but not before taking a break and working on other projects. To my knowledge, he hasn't yet worked on another title, so we might be waiting some time for that, especially if he decides to undertake the project primarily by himself again. I'd definitely be interested in tackling a sequel, especially if the gameplay and art direction were evolved. Dust is a great game, but there's still a lot there that could be improved upon.